Good afternoon. We will now call to order the meeting of the Norwalk WPCA regular meeting of February 22nd, 2022. We do have a quorum and it is 5:30. Is there a motion? Item number 2, is there a motion to approve the minutes of the WPCA meeting held on January 18th, 2022?
So moved.
By Mr. Igneri. Any comments, questions, or corrections? No. Everybody's had a chance to look them over. So we'll call the question. Please say aye and raise your hand. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, Bovee, Ostafine, Flynn, Igneri, Keegan, Smith. That is unanimous. Thank you. Item number 3, schedule public hearing for proposed FY 22-23 sewer user rates on March 21st, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. Is there a motion to approve scheduling the public hearing?
So moved.
Mr. Igneri gets it again. Ralph, I assume you're going to talk about the contents in item number 4?
That's correct. We're going
Okay,
to
so
talk
right
about
now-
the rates.
Okay, so right now we're good. Everybody good? Scheduling the meeting. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Bovee, Ostafine, Flynn, Igneri, Keegan, Smith. That's unanimous also. Okay, we'll move to item number 4, the financial model presentation. No motion necessary. Ralph, presentation.
Going to send to Chief Carr first to start us off.
Well, Mr. Carr, Chief Carr.
Hey, good evening, Mr. Chairman. How are you, members of the WPCA board? So first and foremost, I did want to acknowledge and thank the team for putting together what you're going to see before you in a few moments, which is a presentation of a dynamic model, financial model from Woodard and Curran. Basically this, well, first I'll give the introductions. The project team consisted of Ralph Kobe, Chitsame Lamb, the comptroller for the city of Norwalk, Karen Vitale, the deputy comptroller, Simona Maddox, also in the finance department, the CFO, Henry Dakowicz, and then from the Woodard and Curran side, Anthony Catalano, Toby Fetter, Jim Aiken, and I believe that's it. But I wanted to really acknowledge their efforts and applaud their efforts because it was truly a group decision and a collaborative. Excuse me 1 second, I apologize. One moment.
I can say God bless you.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chair. So this model is basically a summation of and a snapshot of WPCA's financial health, and it's a tool to assist staff with recommendations to your board, Mr. Chairman, on what the appropriate sewer use fee increase should be for the next few years. Now, obviously, this is a dynamic model, so as we gather more data, things such as facts and findings and figures will change. We're very confident with the numbers we have now, but and just to give the board members a little bit of background, there was a prior financial model completed by Red Oak, which is basically a sub-consultant of a company known as Arcadis, formerly known as Malcolm Perney. That model did serve its purpose and was used as a very important planning tool by the WPCA staff and board in the past. We felt it was time for a refresh, especially with the large amount of existing capital projects that we have, future planned capital projects, and a lot of variables that you'll see considered in the upcoming presentation. But the way to look at this model is you're going to hear a term called sensitivity analysis. And what that basically means is a study of many variables that can change, looking at one variable, let's say like a sewer rate increase, leaving that fixed and seeing what the other variables will have it as an impact. So when I say variables, that can mean things like our debt service for existing capital projects. That can mean things like future capital projects that are planned. That may be as a result of a consent order. Increases to the operator contract, Suez Viola contract, that merger, amendment number 1, so on and so forth. So there's a multitude of factors that go into the spreadsheet. And basically, it's a financial 8-ball that shows and includes many, many variables, how they can change, and most importantly, what the WPCA, in consultation with the finance department, finds as an adequate surplus. So meaning that how much cash do we want to have in case of an emergency or catastrophe, i.e. a major issue with the sanitary sewer treatment plant, a major failure of our collection system, the sewer mains in the street. So we did agree on that surplus amount, and that was 90 days or 3 months, 25% of WPCA's annual operating budget, which is approximately, round numbers, $19 million. So a quarter of that is approximately $5 million. And again, that was based on input from Woodard and Curran and their financial experts, the comptroller's office, the CFO. So that was a collaborative recommendation to your board. And Mr. Chairman, I know that that's something that you need to consider with your board, but we truly believe that this model has been appropriately refreshed. A lot of thought went into it, and there was a lot of revisions and back and forth between ourselves, the consultant, and the finance department. Obviously, I've also included the administration, so they're aware of the rate increase and the presentation, as they should be. But this is for your board to decide as well, with input from city staff. And I believe that we have the appropriate level of input that we needed from the model and from the consultant. And again, there'll be terms and financial and graphs and a lot of other figures that will be thoroughly explained throughout the presentation. So please feel free to stop and ask questions and to familiarize yourself, because this is a lot of information, but we're giving you the executive summary with as much detail as we could without being exhaustive and overburdening. So without further ado, again, I'd like to thank WPCA and Woodard and Curran. Fantastic job. This is my second rate study or utility rate study I've been involved with, and this went. Our target was this meeting, and we met that deadline. So I'm more than pleased. So without further ado, Ralph, if you'd like to say a few words before you turn it over to Anthony Catalano and Woodard and Curran, please feel free.
Thank you, Chief. I think you pretty much said it all. With this dynamic financial model, it's a great planning tool for the WPCA staff and the board to see where we are this coming fiscal year and then project out even several years out. We do that on the capital side. We're always looking at current plus 4 additional years for a total of 5 years. With the WPCA operating budget, the big items are the Suez contract, along with the capital projects, related to debt service. Over the next 5 years, currently we have about $28 million in authorized capital accounts that we're doing various projects in collections, pump stations, and at the treatment plant currently. And over the next few years, we've asked for additional capital request monies. So we're going to be looking at about $50 million that's existing plus projected over the next few years. So that the financial model takes all that into consideration, plus the $19 million, along with the inflation, a whole bunch of assumptions. And without taking any more time, I'm going to hand it off to Woodard and Curran to bring up the presentation, and we'll start it off.
I could thank you, Ralph and Chief. I could start just by way of introductions. My name is Anthony Catalano. I'm a senior principal with Woodard and Curran. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to support you on such an important assignment for the WPCA, and really also just thank the support and the team effort from city representatives, including and specifically Ralph as the day-to-day contact to get to the point where we are right now, actually. And so clearly you're in good hands with Ralph and asking the right questions and being responsive. So thank you, Ralph. And really this board should be commended for being forward thinking and thinking about things in terms of refreshing this rate study and seeing where you are currently. And so we have with us the leader of our finance practice, Toby Fetter, and his project manager, I should say, James Aiken. And so I will hand it off to Toby, and certainly as we go through this, if questions come up, please do not hesitate to ask those questions. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Toby.
Certainly. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. As the lead-in is indicated, we're just going to be walking through sort of the planning process, talking a bit about many of the assumptions and other factors that go into a financial model, and talking about how those have played out in our projection. And I suppose at Ralph and the chief's direction, if you would like to see certain portions of the model, we can show you to a certain degree. It's not terribly effective to present these remotely, but we can show you what the financial model looks like and the level of sensitivity analysis, meaning the ability to assess the impact of changes to whether it be capital investments, changes to contracts, and really give you a living, really a living document that allows you over the course of the next 5 years to make sure that that you are planning appropriately to make sure your rates pay for the full cost of providing the WPCA service. So with that, I'll share my screen. And suppose let me know when you can see.
It's up.
We're good, Toby.
Okay, wonderful. So I will just, I'm just going to kick right off here. I apologize. I'll be looking over to my left. So it'll look like I'm not looking at you, but I'm running a split screen here. So as we walk through the slides, sometimes I will not be addressing you directly. So. Again, as was alluded to, really the process here, the project scope was to update the financial plan and put the WPCA on really the path forward, or at least identify the path forward for fiscal success over the coming 5 years. And that's a pretty short description, and I'll talk you through sort of how that's done a little bit later in the presentation. But I know it's been said a number of times, I have rarely worked with a client where the WPCA and the finance department have worked as effectively and collaboratively in order to make sure that we are all comparing apples to apples. Oftentimes in cities the size of Norwalk, you will have different departments who look at things fundamentally differently. And by all means, both the comptroller's office, the CFO, and the WPCA folks were always available and ready to talk through and make sure that the model, as it's designed and built and resulted in the recommendations that we'll show later, actually operates on a fiscal basis in the way that the WPCA and city operate. So that's an important consideration, so that we aren't trying to give you solutions that there will be objections to, well, that's not exactly how it works. So that's all been taken care of in this case. So to the assumptions in the model. So right now we have a forecast period on the rates for approximately, well, not approximately, for 5 years, basically fiscal 23, which is next year, all the way through fiscal 27, which I believe in WPCA nomenclature is usually referred to as 26-27. But for the purposes of the presentation and the purposes of the model, the fiscal cycle is always by the year that fiscal period ends in. And since you run a July through June year, fiscal year 27 would end on June 30th of 1927. And that would be, I believe, like I said, that would be your 26-27 nomenclature year. So the basis of the model is basically spending in the current fiscal cycle. And then we make some escalations that are in line with a couple of things, industry standards being one of them, expectations for inflation. And as an engineering firm, Woodard & Curran, we put out to bid hundreds of millions of dollars of work every year. And so we obviously have a pretty strong cost estimation crew. And so we have some internal expectations for what is likely to happen with capital projects over the coming years. That's included. We've included also escalators for the new contract with Suez. And that's based on the new agreement that just came into force in January. And a number of other items as well. We include variables for various forms of financing and such. But in essence, we make all of these projections, and then we want to have some goals. And the first one was alluded to by the chief. It's an operating reserve target. This is sort of one of the goals. An operating reserve target when we are looking at rates of making sure that you always have at least 3 months of annual O&M expenses, a debt service coverage capability of 1.05 times. Now, as it turns out, you're going to have significantly more than that for much of the next, or the coming 5-year period, but it has been a policy in the past, and it's one that we fully intend on helping you maintain. And then obviously, we make the assumption from the standpoint of revenue generation estimates within the model that all annual rate increases go into force on the first day of the fiscal cycle, meaning so January 1, the new rates are in force, or if depending on exactly how you bill in your billing policies, possibly as early as April 1 as well, in order to get the full 3-month billing period before the July bills go out. So we have, growth can solve a whole host of problems, and we don't want to make assumptions about that. So we've included no projection of growth within customer accounts or flows that would lead to additional revenues. That's a conservative approach, certainly in the way that cities have been developing in the past couple of years. So we do have a provision within the model for uncollectible debts. That's included in pretty much all of our models. And we've made some assumptions about flows coming in from other communities remaining the same as they have been in the past. So on to the escalation numbers. We are expecting that these numbers are up quite a bit over the course of the past 18 months, as I'm sure everyone can understand. But labor, we are currently escalating within the budget at 5%. Benefits for employees of WPCA at 7.5%, and then general construction-related escalators, contractual obligators. Other than the Suez contract, we are escalating at 5%. Insurance, other than normal benefits, 7.5%. The SRF, that's not an escalator. That's the expected cost of borrowing. SRF, for everyone's for those who aren't familiar with the terms, since it has not been used in a while in Stamford for the in Norwalk for the WPCA, as I understand it. That is the state revolving fund. That is the state subsidized lending vehicle run by the Connecticut Deep for projects similar to what many of the projects that are actually in your CIP. And then we are escalating the Suez costs also at 5%. All of these are modifiable in a single place within the model, so that if we feel a year from now, 6 months from now, that some of these numbers are no longer appropriate, you go in, you change the value one time, and the entire model recalculates, and you get to see what the changes look like. So we are funding within the model repair and replacement at $3 million per year for 23 and 24, and $1 million per year for 25 through 27. As I said earlier, we have the operating budget increase included under the new Suez contract, and we do have some new general obligation bond rates based on what we're seeing in the market at the current time. So again, the objectives: we want to maintain our operating cash reserve, we want to cover our debt service, and most importantly, we want to fully fund operating expenses. And really what we're talking about there, and within the rate model itself, it's really sort of a two-step dance. A rate model is, and a financial plan or a financial model, really it's the two sides of the ledger, you might say. The first piece is really making sure that you have a rational and reasonable projection of what we think the WPCA is going to expend on an annual basis in each of the years. And that's really comprised of 3 different components. The first is really your operating budgets, including the operations contract with Suez. Those are, based on historical trends and what we expect for cost escalation in the future. The second piece on the expense side is basically the debt service that the WPCA is already obligated to repay based on prior borrowing. Obviously, when you go out to market and a bank buys the note or the SRF, if you were to go that route, you get a repayment schedule. It's kind of like a mortgage is a good way to think of it. It's you've borrowed the money and you're required to pay back a certain amount in each of the given fiscal cycles. So that's the second piece. And then the third piece, which I think was a big part of the reason that the chief and Ralph decided that this was a good time to reassess the financial program was simply because you have a very significant amount of capital upcoming. And that's the third piece of the expense, is taking what we expect to be spending on capital projects over the coming 5 years or so, and making sure that the cash flow that's needed to do the construction, whether that be through cash on hand, whether it be through borrowing either from general obligation sources or from the SRF, making sure that as the construction in the capital plan is done, that number, the amount of money that you're going to need to pay either out of cash or in new debt service coming onto the books is accounted for in what you'll need to raise for rates. So those are really sort of the objectives, is to make sure we're fully funding that. And we do in the model, as has been done with the WPCA for years, you use excess available cash to fund a portion of the capital projects over the planning period. And you'll see that indeed we are doing that when we get to what our expected rate performance is. So coming out of this, obviously using your existing customer base, your existing revenue generation characteristics, these are the rate increases that we would recommend given the capital program that you have and given the expected increase in costs, both on contractual as well as all other things in this somewhat inflationary environment we're in. So we are looking at a recommended 4% increase in your volumetric rates and your fixed charges for 2023, which begins on July 1 of this year, meaning this calendar year, and then the same for next year, and then the following 3 years, 5% increases. And as I said, those are what we project with your existing customer base. You will need to raise your rates in order to fully pay for the cost of service, even as you spend down some of your existing cash on hand. So with that said, this is what we would project your performance is going to end up being on the year end. So the vertical bars on this chart are basically your cash available, meaning unrestricted cash and bond proceeds from prior bonding that are available at the end of each of the fiscal cycles. So for example, at the end of what this would show us is that at the end of fiscal 27, we would expect you still to have around $17.5 million in the combination of those two sources. But over that time period, you would have spent a very significant chunk of the cash that you have on hand. And really the goal there, and the reason that we don't just spend all of the cash on hand right up front, is because beyond the 5-year projection that we have here, the model itself does project for for 10 years in effect. We continue to see the bars come down until they basically reach the level of the operating cash reserve target. And that's the goal, is that so when you get to the end of a projection period, you're basically breaking even at an appropriate level of cash reserves. And getting there in 5 years would end up having to have much larger rate increases than what we're seeing. And I think that the 2 years of 4% increases and the 3 years of 5% increases put you on the path to having success all the way out to fiscal 30, where, as I said, you will, in between 27 and 30, you have a continuing number of projects that are going to be being constructed, many of them out of cash. So that said, these are what we would expect sort of the basic metrics to be. Expenditures, cash finance capital, and basically at the bottom, we have your year-end operating cash on hand and the number of days of operating expenses that increase or that indicates. Now, what I would say is, because you'll be taking on debt over the course of these years, this 229 is going to shrink down to about 90 over the course of the following 5 years from this projection. And so by keeping modest rate increases now, modest in comparison. Some people wouldn't consider 5% modest, but by keeping them at a reasonable level now in comparison to the amount of spending we expect in the future, we'll prevent the WPCA from getting into a position where you need a double-digit rate increase in some year, and ensures that the current customers are paying their fair share of the needed upgrades. I mean, anything on wastewater treatment systems is expensive, as the CIP within the model attests, and this is the way that we would recommend in order to maintain long-term financial adequacy for the utility. Now, sort of the next question always is, well, what does that mean to the standard family? And this would be your residential single family fee. In fiscal 23, it would go up by $15 to $382, and then continue to increase along the lines of what's shown on the chart, up to $460 per year in fiscal 27. And with that, I'd be more than happy to answer any and all questions that the board may have.
Do you have any questions?
Yes. Is it okay for me to stop sharing my screen so I can see full
Sure,
screen for?
Yeah, because I
folks on
can't see
speaker?
anybody waving their hand.
Okay.
Anybody have a question? No questions. I'll try and repeat what you said to make sure I understood it.
Sure.
You're talking about 3 months operating. That's it. That's all you want to have on hand. And it looked like the graph that you just showed, we are depleting our reserve to 17 million.
So it's important to recognize that a big it's not most of it, but a big chunk of the reserve that is shown on that bar. So that bar represents two things. It represents the unrestricted cash balance as documented by the comptroller's office, combined with the remaining money from the $20 million 2020 Series D general obligation issue, which was issued intentionally to fund capital projects for the WPCA. So most of the burn that you see there, where the bar comes down, most of that is just spending money that was intentionally bonded to pay for capital projects. If you see my point.
I do, but I'm not a financial guy. I don't have a sense or a feel for how many capital projects were done from the bond. What's the remaining balance from the bond now, for example?
As we documented it over the course of the past week or 2 weeks through a number of meetings, about $12.8 million of that $20 million bond remains to be expended. So of the amount that we burned down the reserves, so to speak, most of it is actually just spending the cash that was bonded specifically to fund WPCA projects.
Okay, thank you. What about capital? You talk about operating. It doesn't seem like we're going to have any cash on hand. Basically, if something goes terribly catastrophically wrong, we basically can pay the light bill for 3 months. What if something happens like a hurricane that takes out the headworks, for example? We're completely unprepared for that with only 3 months of cash on hand for operating. Isn't that right?
Here's by the time we make it down to, and I'm sorry, I'm back on a split screen here.
It was 35 million to 17 million. Does that sound about right? 35 million.
That was the decrease, and it will come down a bit more in the future. But one of the important things to remember is by the time you make it all the way down to that, into that the range between 90 and 120 days of cash reserves, you'll have expended north of $50 million reinvesting in the things that you're worried about failing, right? And so as you invest capital into existing assets, you make them more reliable by definition. If you replace 25-year-old blower systems or whatever mechanical systems it is. I have a copy of the CIP in the model up in front of me. But as I said, you have right now in today's dollars, and these do get escalated within the model in some cases. In today's dollars, you have $53 million worth of capital that will be completed through fiscal 27, fiscal 28. Okay, and so that's implicit in the rates that we see, and it's implicit in the in basically the cash burn that you did see. When we burn down the cash, you're going to be getting quite a bit for that. You are going to be doing some more bond issuance going forward. You haven't bonded all of the money you'll need, but the fact of the matter is all of the costs of the future bonding are in the model, as well as the expenditure of cash on hand from the 2020 bonding event.
Okay, thanks.
So, Toby, let me add to what you just discussed.
Yes.
Chief or Chairman, this financial model, we're looking to update it at least once a year, maybe twice a year. So it doesn't take into consideration future clean water funds that we may be able to receive from the state. We put in recently 3 applications for the treatment plant itself. And if we do receive some kind of grants, that would then be included in the model. And we rerun it to look at where we are in 5 to 10 years again. But that going to that 90-day operating cash reserve is really 10 years out. 5 years out, we're still doing more than the 6 months that we've held, in previous years. Plus, in addition to all that, there's other options that we can work with finance. If we start using up our operating funds, there's a lot of tools that they can do. One, again, go out and bond for the WPCA again to fund some of the capital projects. Our debt service then would go up, but that is a tool that would be available to the team.
Ralph is exactly right. I mean, one way, at least when I'm thinking about capital projects and the fiscal impact on utilities, to me, $1 million sounds like a lot of money, and it is on an individual sort of, walking out the door basis. But what $1 million really represents to a utility who's doing debt financing is about $65,000 a year. Because if you do it, and that's on a 20-year general obligation bond, if, as Ralph was indicating, you end up being able to get some of the CT Deep clean water funds, the SRF funds, and some of the grant shares that may well flow through that program with the ARPA funding, then by all means, some of the rate, the rate increases that we show, they may be able to be modified, re-bracketed, so to speak. But from the standpoint of setting rates and setting expectations for rates, we never like to make assumptions about, counting chickens, so to speak. You want to say, what is it that we need to do in order to maintain the long-term technical viability of the utility, and then we plan to be able to raise those funds through rates. If we don't end up needing to raise all those funds due to whether it be, as Ralph was saying, actions by the finance department, whether it be the receipt of grant funding, obviously that changes things, but we don't, and I would strongly advise against making any assumptions about grant funding and other ways of financing other than through rates. We set rate expectations based on needing to pay for the going utility.
And Mr. Chairman, just to also piggyback on Toby's point and Ralph's point, as we know from the public works lens and also for the WPCA board, the purpose of an enterprise fund, because that's exactly what the sewer utility is, or a water utility, the purpose is to basically break even with a sufficient amount of surplus in the kitty, we'll say, for the event that, yes, you have to pay the electricity bills, but there's always that delicate balance of, if you raise the rates too low, then you're not covering your existing capital debt, your future capital debt, and you're also not planning for the future for any long-term improvements, maybe from a consent order. If you raise them too high, Now a taxpayer could arguably say, hey, your enterprise fund really isn't supposed to be making any money. We understand there's an acceptable amount of surplus, and now that might vary from jurisdiction and agency, right? And different experts will say different things, and that is something that myself, Ralph, and the Woodland and Curran team, and the comptroller's office, and the CFO, everybody kind of bounced back and forth. That was really the one variable that there's no cut and dry answer for it. It's really what the needs and the wants and the status of the municipality. We are in very good financial health, the WPCA. And again, as Mr. Catalano pointed out, that's attributed to the experts that you have in WPCA long before I've gotten here and surely before Woodland and Curran arrived. But the summary is that if, we did look at 180 days of surplus, 270. Now those rate increases turn into 6, 7, 8, 10%. And you're right, there is a question of if there's a major catastrophe and the headworks building goes out, what do you do? And we have a lot of different alternatives that we've employed and discussed, and whether that's grant funding or relief funding, working things out with the CFO's office. There is funding available, but to present it in today's dollars to the taxpayer is a struggle as to what that right number or wrong number, a high number, or low number should be or will be. And that's why we use these financial tools, as you know, to help inform ourselves so we can make a better recommendation and a just and a fair and equitable recommendation to the board, saying, okay, if you have all these parameters, this is what we recommend. Now, Mr. Chairman, you and the board could arguably change the rates and make it lower or higher. We will note that there was a 0% increase last year. So coming off of a 0% increase in the fees, in my experience, I've seen 2 to 5% as being a pretty standard and acceptable range in sewer rate increases. Sometimes it's a little bit more if you're paying off a major capital project like a new headworks building. Maybe you'll get up to that 8 to 10% realm. But I'll defer to Toby and Ralph too on their experience and Mr. Catalano on what they've seen. But 2 to 5% is a healthy increase. Certainly, what this sensitivity analysis shows us is that it can't be zero. It can't be 0, and it can't be 1, and it can't be 2, based on the pending projects, based on the already authorized projects, based on the consent order, which, as you've seen that in the presentation too, we do have in out years $5 million fiscal year request, so $15 million total for potential future improvements to the headworks building as a result of that Connecticut Deep consent order. And we've also built in additional monies for the collection system, anticipating that we'll have to continue to address I&I issues. So that's another reason why that rate is a little bit higher than we like, but we felt we struck a fair balance for you and your board to consider. And Toby and Ralph, if I've missed anything or any of the variables that should be included, again, but that surplus is really, and Toby, you could speak to this in what you've seen in other jurisdictions and utilities. I think it'd be important for the board to hear what the ranges and surpluses you've seen between jurisdictions and agencies.
Certainly. So when you're talking about enterprise funds, there are no hard and fast rules. And in truth, the policies, because that is what we're talking about here is a policy. That's not really so much for me to set, but to the point or to the question of, what we see. I've seen reserve policies as low as 10%. But that would only be in systems that didn't own their own treatment plants and things along those lines. Where you guys own a treatment plant, you own a lot of pump stations. You have assets at lower, sort of lower elevation in comparison to sea level. Certainly, something significantly above that is warranted. I do think that there is the real question, and I think the chief hit it on the head. The real question of if you allow in an enterprise fund reserves to get too high and not be expended, especially in the manner they were intended for in the case of the bonded debt, then by all means it does sometimes create real problems from the standpoint of having appropriate rate increases. Now, the one thing I would say in addition with Norwalk is, the recommendations as we sort of bounce the ball around the table, so to speak, with the full team. The one thing that I do think it's worth noting is because you're quite heavy on the capital spending as relates to the needs for your rate increases right now. Obviously, inflation is going significantly faster even than we're accounting for, because we do believe it's going to pull back. But where it is a very significant amount of the spending that's going to occur in the next 5 years, I do think that being being conservative would be a higher rate, being non-conservative would be a lower rate increase. I do think the 4% that we came to takes the risks and the benefits of the risks. It takes into account the risks of higher costs versus the benefits of a more moderate rate increase. I think that it takes it into account in the right way, is I suppose maybe the best way I can put it. But I do agree with the chief that I do think it would be a mistake to have significantly smaller rate increases than what's recommended, given the amount of capital that you have on your plate.
I wasn't saying anything about that. I just thought that we're looking at a 4% rate increase, 4% for at our next meeting, our next public hearing. I thought that when you looked at a percentage, you were always looking at a percentage of your assets, not necessarily operating. And I know our assets are huge. You explained it quite well. I understand the capital. We're gonna put a lot of investment into our capital, and it wouldn't be expected to fail. Great explanation. I'll shut up. Ignary and Smith had questions. Mr. Ignary, I think, was first.
Well, my questions were answered by the chief and Toby quite well. I was just wondering, with inflation spiking so much this year, why we didn't just go to the 5%. It's one more percent is going to be modest. And I think the mindset right now is we are getting hit with inflation hard. I thought 5% throughout the 5-year period might work better, but you've run the model and I've heard your answers on both points. So I think it's good. And the model is flexible going forward if we need to go up a little bit more.
That's correct. Yeah, the model will be a living document for the WPCA. And if we do need to adjust in the future, because none of us can truly tell the future, then the model allows you to make an informed decision if you decide to make changes.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ostafine. A comment and a question. Working with Anthony as I have over these past several years, I know that he takes taxpayer dollars very seriously, and I really so much appreciate about that about you, Anthony, and your staff. And so I know you wouldn't be asking for this rate increase if it weren't very much needed. So that's my comment. My question is, what is the history of the increases in the past 5 years? Were there no increases for a period of time? Were there small increases? And is a 4% increase going to feel, is going to hurt for taxpayers?
Ralph, I know you may have.
Yeah, he's looking. I can see him.
Hey, Ralph, I know you probably know most of the numbers off the top of your head, but Councilman Smith, the last year's increase was 0%. And again, that was the sensitivity to those experiencing financial hardships, or those who may not be experiencing financial hardships at that moment during the pandemic. And again, to kind of answer Board Member Ignery's question too, you could have flipped it and done 5% this year, but since there was consideration to us still being in the pandemic. I mean, we might be on the tail end of it or the back end, whichever way you want to consider, or in the middle of it, depending on what lens you're looking through. But there was financial sensitivity to those maybe who have lost their jobs, who are looking for new jobs, where life has changed completely for them. So that, it's all relative. If that extra 1% is a lot or a little, it might be a lot to some people, might be a little to others. But given the sensitivity to that, that is one of the major reasons why we elected to stick with the 4%, because last year was 0. We didn't necessarily want to swing and have too much of a delta to 5% one year. So we wanted to ease the transition over the next few years, which, as Toby and Ralph and Anthony have alluded to, that it could change. This is dynamic. What we know now, based on inflation rates and customers and usage, could change very much in the future. And maybe the last few out years, the last 3 years, we'll say, maybe they could be 4%.
Barbara asked a question, and she wanted to know what the trend was. You mentioned that we had a
0% last year and
last year.
What do
What
we know
about the
prior?
previous
Yeah,
years?
prior to that. And
Yes.
that, I know everyone was zeroed out last year as we're dealing with, tonight with the, with voting on the cap at the Common Council meeting. But yeah, a lot of people were zeroed out last year, a lot of a great sensitivity on the city's part to that. But what's the history prior to that? Have there been 2% increases, 3% increases?
No, understood.
Yeah.
I was trying to buy Ralph a little time so he could pull up the spreadsheet.
Yep. So, Ms. Smith, I can answer your question now. Prior to the 0%, we had a 2% increase, 2 years of 2%, a year of 5%, 1.5%, and then going back the 3 years prior to that is 5% increases. There was a time with various, with the Headworks building going in construction back in 2008, design in 08 and 2009. It went online in 2012. That was a $40 million construction project that the WPCA board took a, let's go up 5% a year approach versus having, 2 or 3% and then a 7 or 8% increase to cover, future spending. We're kind of at the same spot in time where we've been spending down past capital projects, pump stations, collection system projects, but with the regulatory agencies, we're in discussion now with them, and what we're looking at doing for the city of Norwalk, putting a lot of effort into collections. We already did amendment number 1 with Suez to increase staffing, adding 3 positions and a Vector truck. We're in design on a $3 to $4 million collection system project to put that out to bid later this year. And then, like the chief and Toby had mentioned earlier, in future years, we have a placeholder for $15 million for treatment plant improvements, wet weather improvements. So, we're at that point where we do have a lot of capital going in, and we are approaching that 5% range again.
Mhm.
I
Okay.
would say-
That's really helpful because there have been 5% increases in recent years. So it shouldn't be too shocking to residents.
I can recall one other time when there was a 0% increase under Moshe, Ralph.
That is correct.
Okay. So it's varied.
Fiscal year 13-14.
Okay. Long time ago, but there was a 0 before most recently. Anybody else? Any questions? We spent a lot of time on that, but that was really helpful, really good to understand.
Very,
where we're
very
going.
good and understandable.
Yeah, I
Thank
agree.
you. And thank you, board.
Just to add, Chairman, with the proposed 4% rate increase, the new rates would be $382 per residential unit. The flat rate would go from $525 to $546, and the consumption rate would go from $9.49 to $9.87, and that's all based on 4% standard across the board.
Including, Ralph, also including our external customers. Just to note I know the chairman, you may know this, but for the newer members, we also have an agreement with the town of Wilton, who is an external customer, and their sewer use fee is based on a calculated engineering formula, but nonetheless, that formula will be increased by 4% as well too. So we do have an external customer that will be experiencing the same increase as well.
Correct. In addition to the town of Wilton, we have about 10 customers in Westport that we bill annually for sewer charges.
Mr. Chairman, can we move on to the next question?
If you don't have any more questions, Mr. Flynn, you good? Everybody good? Any more questions? Thank you very much to the consultant. Great presentation. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Item number 5, contract operations report.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, hey, John, before you get start, I just want to say thank you for the Woodard and Curran team. And unless you guys have anything else, we're all set. You guys can, go take care of other business.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you, Anthony, Jim, and Toby. Well done, as
All right.
usual.
Good
Thank
evening,
you very
everyone.
much.
Take
Thank
care.
you, board members. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Also, I know some people are gonna have to leave for a common council meeting, so thanks for showing up and doing the business. We're in reports now, so if you have to leave, thanks for joining us. Okay, contract
There's a few
operation
more
reports.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I echo Ralph's comments. That was very well done. That can be a very complicated and confusing process. I've seen it done in a number of communities I've worked in. And it seems to make sense and was very well presented. So looks like you got a good. All right, I'll be pretty quick today. January was a quiet month, but busy. We did experience an escalation in our COVID severity levels like many places did following the holidays. So we spent January in our level 3 severity level, which included adherence with CDC guidelines and limitations on visitors and subcontractors. We thankful the rates have dropped substantially and we fared very well through the latest wave. Our collection team completed over 2.6 miles of TV inspection and 2.6 miles of sewer line cleaning in January. And they also completed 18 manhole inspections. We did suspend the IPP inspection program for the month of January in relation to the COVID severity level 3. And but we do have resumed those inspections in February. And we've also continued to receive septage from Stanford while they complete their construction. Facility was in compliance with all permit limits in January. And our monthly nitrogen performance was elevated. January is always the most difficult month. We were at 642, which is well below our contract and permit limits. And that begins our 2020 annual average. In addition, the net DMR, MOR, and ATMR were all submitted to EPA and DEP during the month. Just a couple of quick parameters. I know folks are interested in. Our flow was about 11.6 during the month. BOD and TSS were all below 6. Fecals were 4, and Intero was 16, which are good numbers. We also maintained about 24.4% cake solids off of the centrifuge during the month, which is continues to perform well. Give you a quick update on the odor control project. We did energize both carbon scrubbers at the end of December and into January. The system ran well for several weeks, and unfortunately we had a failure of the bearings on the fan for the blend tank unit. So it's a warranty item. We've had the manufacturer back. They actually took the entire motor and fan assembly back to their shop. They're making the necessary repairs, and we should have that back online either the end of this week or early next week. We've also had some good promising feedback from 2 engineers on the sludge blend tank repairs. And we are optimistic that we're going to be able to do patch repairs on the existing tanks. And we've just finalizing quotes from 2 engineering firms to come in and develop that final scope of work. Once they do that, then we have a number of welding shops that we can work with to come in and do those repairs. So it looks like we're looking towards a repair option on that, which is great. Continue to finalize our permits in relation to the Orchard Street sanitary sewer improvements. Had many of you may have saw we had a rather large sewer main collapse on Seaview Ave in January. It resulted in a fairly complicated multi-day dig, but we were able to get the line completely repaired and all the excavation backfilled safely without any incidents and without any SSOs. And the plan is to work with Ralph and our subcontractors to line a portion or significant portion of that gravity line that goes down Seaview Ave. We also have 3 projects that we began work on in January. One is the removal of the drum screens. Those are the screens inside of the stormwater discharge system that we've had approval from DEP to remove. It's sort of phase 1 in the preparation for the consent order and any improvements that might be related to that. We've also engaged our subcontractor in the rehabilitation of final settling tank, or FST number 2. We previously did tank number 3, which involved replacement of the center drive, sandblasting and epoxy coating of all the metal structures, and the replacement of the rubber squeegee and scraper components. So our plan is to do that on tank 2, and when that's completed, we'll have 2 of the 4 tanks completely rehabilitated, and the plan will be to continue through all 4 through the end of this year. And lastly, we had a replacement of a scum pump electrical components that was part of a scum piping project that we've been working on with the city and Wright Pierce. It's one of the final pieces to put that new system online. So that's what we were up to this month. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Hey, John, I got one question. I don't know if you mentioned our nitrogen performance for 2021 for the annual. That number was our second best year ever.
Yeah.
And our pounds per day averaged 519 pounds per day of nitrogen going out to the sound. The year prior, just for comparison, 2020 was our all-time best number, and that was 498 pounds. So since Suez has been the contract operator, we've had our 2 top nitrogen performance years.
That's great, Ralph. Thanks for mentioning that. It's a big
That
priority
is great.
for us, as you know. The oystermen are very appreciative too.
Anybody else?
Nope, I don't.
From Mr. Marcin, any questions from Mr. Marcin? No. Number
Great.
6, Ralph?
Reports, the Munis report is attached in the board package if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to continue moving on to the WPCA projects. Item 1 is collection system master planning, and that's with Brown and Caldwell. We actually had a meeting with the Suez team, WPCA staff, and the Brown and Caldwell team on the hydraulic model. We'll continue to get the model in sync with the flow data that was monitored. The reason is sometimes there's like debris in the pipes, and the flow meters read a little bit elevated water levels in the pipe, and the hydraulic model predicts something a little less. So the team is adding that value to say, oh yeah, we found the pipe to be 50% full. Okay, now the modeler team can go back and add that debris in the hydraulic model to get the flow meter and the model to be in sync. So that way we have the best analysis moving forward. So that's what the team's been doing, is just fine tuning the model. And then we'll be able to start running various scenarios, and then working with the Brown Caldwell team on the engineering side to develop future projects, and continue to finalize what we're calling the collection system master plan update for September of 2022. So that's moving forward. Item 2, sanitary sewer system rehabilitation, various locations. This is with our consultant, Green Mountain Pipeline Services. They're doing punch list items, and like Mr. Marston indicated earlier, they're going to line about 1,400 feet of 15-inch clay pipe on Seaview Avenue from Fort Point to Osborne. So that was 1890s clay tile pipe that we're going to line, and once we line it, it's good for at least 50 years or more. Item 3, Wall Street to Knight Street relocation improvements project. Holzner is the contractor, and work has been slow. It's been through the shop drawing submittal review process with our consultant, Arcadis. However, they've already relocated a gas service line, and we're in the process of relocating a water service line in order to install our large chamber at that property. Collection, Belden and Burnell Boulevard Gravity Sewer. This project has taken the contractor Avidi out of Stanford much longer than anticipated, and not to their defense, they've uncovered every utility possible in a small section of the city. It's just been very challenging getting a gravity line out to the Belden Burnell intersection, but we did succeed last week. The gravity works completed. Right now they're out there patching, temporary asphalting the road, concrete, the sidewalks. And come spring, when the plant's open, they'll come back out, replace the temporary patch with final asphalt. Same with the concrete work. So I'm glad to see that that is completed. But what that does, it provides the Yankee Doodle garage and the adjoining. I think there's a post office / pizza place, nail salon, transit district, lunch office area. All that was connected into an old line that actually goes under, was at Avalon Project and was hard to maintain. So this new line is dedicated to that building and goes out to Belden Avenue. So that way we can eventually take that off our hotspot where we had to maintain it once every 13 weeks. Let's see, Wright Pierce miscellaneous task order. We included a copy in the board package. It's a task order in the amount of $40,700, and this provide professional services for the construction admin of the Belden Avenue. We also have a Bell Island bypass connection vault that we're going to be installing. So it's provide those engineering services along with some assistance at the treatment plant for various projects like the sludge blend tank project, just to have them at the table as we figure out the correct approach going forward. They can provide some guidance as well. So that's in the board package. Item 6, pump station project, which includes 5 Mile, Old Trolleyway, Karen Drive, and Woodward Avenue. This is Kovacs Construction, is the contractor. They just finished the bypass connection for Woodward Avenue pump station. They're going to be, they're developing a plan to install the bypass connection for 5 Mile and Old Trolleyway. What this does, it allows us in an emergency to utilize the existing force main. So we have to bring in Godwin pumps or some other pump manufacturer. We can connect the force main from the pumps to this bypass connection and utilize the existing force main in the ground versus having to run 1,000 feet or more of force main pipe on the surface, which can impact roadways or driveways. It's just more of an inconvenience. So this is just like what we're doing in Bell Island. We're trying to reduce impact to the neighborhood by improving these stations. The construction work, though, at these pump stations does also include replacing pumps and piping within the building. First setup is to get the bypass connection, and then they can start looking to shut the pump station down and do all the internal plumbing and the pump work. So their contract goes into August of this year. Already touched a little bit on Bell Island. Like I said, we're putting a bypass connection vault down by our pump station in the it's in the grass area next to a stone area. We've been working with the association president for Bell Island. He's aware of what we're doing. We met once out on site. We've shared drawings recently and continue to work with him to make sure that the association down there is aware of what we're doing along the way. Item 8, treatment plant. Kovacs Construction was awarded the aeration tanks electrical infrastructure improvements project here at the wastewater treatment plant. That is currently ongoing, and we're in the process of the contractor submitting all the shop drawing items for review by our engineer Arcadis. So that project consists of basically raising the electrical from underneath the walkway to above structures, and that way it's going to prolong the life of the electrical. And if we do have any future electrical issues, it's right there. It's easy to access. Item 9, SCADA upgrade phase 3. That's still ongoing with Arcadis and their subconsultant, Aaron Associates. A lot of it is punch list items or what we're calling phase 3 items. These are add-on items that the team identified after the main SCADA project to go online to add. Some of it is to add programming or monitoring of plant equipment that was not previously on SCADA. Does anyone have any questions on any of the projects? All right, if not, we'll move to appeal status is $135,210 to date. And the last item is we recently submitted the 2021 Cso Annual Report. A copy of the report is in the board package. I guess just to note, we did have when we report the Cso Annual Report, that's on outfall 002 at the wastewater treatment plant. That is our wet weather process and discharge. There was 4 events in 2021. 2 of those came with the 2 major tropical storm hurricanes, Elsa and Ida. Any other questions? All right, Mr. Chairman, let's give it back to you.
Do we have any questions on anything on this agenda or not included in this agenda? No. Is there a motion to adjourn? Aye. Ovi, Ostafine, Flynn, Igneri, and Keegan. That is unanimous. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. You can stop recording.
Thank you all.